Hello and welcome to Knit in the City. I am Rebecca and I'm back on the screen after a short hiatus that wasn't planned, but life. And today I have a bit of a dreaded episode, and I will tell you why later, and it's about yarn weights. I had a comment from a viewer that wanted to learn more about different yarn weights. And I got this comment after my episode about beginner knits. And then of course a beginner probably don't know a lot about yarn weights. I don't know a lot about yarn weights. I mean, I know a bit more now because I have researched the topic a bit. And the reason that I have been treading this is that this is no exact science. There are many different opinions. But I would still like to thank the viewer who gave me the suggestion, because I mean I love getting suggestions for video ideas, and then I also get a feel for what the viewers want to watch. And this is a very interesting topic that we should dive deeper into. And perhaps I have been talking about it, like maybe I haven't been correct most likely I haven't been correct every time I've been talking about this. But I will try to clear things up a little bit, and we'll see if we're wiser after this episode or not. And I'm sure that many of you out there know more than I do. I have kind of learned about this through osmosis, like being part of the knitting community, knitting, reading books about knitting, watching videos about knitting. I mean, it just happens organically, I guess. Yes, and most of the information I have gathered from the Craft Yarn Council, which is an American association. And the reason for this is just that I knew about it. This was familiar to me, and I knew that I could find the information there. And I'm sure that they have similar associations in other countries. Another reason is that, to the best of my knowledge, we don't really talk about yarn weights in Sweden. And if I'm wrong, please correct me in the comments. But I mean, everyone I know and have talked about who knows about knitting, we use the English terms for the different yarn weights. So that's another reason. Yes, and about the meterage or yardage, I have collected from different sources, because the Craft Yarn Council does not put that in their chart about yarn weights. So I have picked these from different sources. It's not the same everywhere, so I have just been trying to make sense of it, and all the numbers are approximations. Yes. What else? Yeah, and also the reason I chose to put meterage into the mix, it is a bit tricky, but it's because when I make yarn substitutions, the whole yarn weight system is so that you can make substitutions for different yarn. I mean, if a pattern calls for a specific yarn, you can use the yarn weight system to substitute, because all of the yarns within one category is supposed to be interchangeable. I mean, this is not the whole truth, because that depends on the quality of the, or not quality, but qualities of the yarn, you know what I mean. Because I mean, worsted spun and woolen spun are different. The woolen spun just fills out space better than the worsted spun, which is more sleek. Not who, it's not a person. And there are like yarns that behave differently, like blown yarns, like this one, or unspun yarns, or mohair, that are not just easily interchangeable with yarns within that same category, that have different qualities. I hope you understand what I'm saying. Yes, the Craft Yarn Council divides the different yarn weights into different categories, of course, but they have numbered them from 1 through 7, and they also use different names than the common names, or the names that I have been using in my videos and that most of my colleagues use in their videos. So I am going to use the names that you will probably be familiar with, and I will just not bother about the number systems or the other names that the Craft Yarn Council uses, just so that I won't confuse you more than you were before. So yeah, what else? Yeah, I also wanted to say that the worsted Aran categories, they are one category according to the Craft Yarn Council. And in my humble opinion, they are two different categories. And this is where opinions divide and the jury's still out, I guess. But I am going to treat them like two different categories because the yarns are supposed to be interchangeable within the category. And I don't really feel comfortable with substituting a yarn that has 130 meters per 100 grams with one that has 200 meters per 100 grams. I mean, that's quite a big difference. But I mean, I could be wrong, and you do whatever you feel like, of course, because that is the thing with knitting. What you do, what feels good to you. The rules are not hard and fast. Okay, and you also need to keep in mind that you can knit any yarn in a different gauge than what is recommended for that yarn weight. So you can knit a sport weight yarn to a fingering weight gauge, which is a good idea if you're making socks or mittens that you want to be rather dense and thick. Or you can knit a lace weight yarn to a DK weight gauge, and you get a fabric that is loose and airy. And the lace weight yarns are often used to knit lace, which is really open. So there is a caveat. I am going to show examples of all of the different yarn weights. So I'm going to show you a yarn that is within the category that I'm talking about. And perhaps I will also put pictures of things that I have knit with this yarn weight. I don't know. I'll have to search through my Ravelry library and see if I can find anything like that. And also, I will tell you in advance that the thickest yarn or the biggest yarn weight that I am going to talk about is going to be bulky or chunky. And I don't have a yarn in this weight, so I will just put a picture of a yarn in that weight, and hopefully you can see what it looks like. Yes. And in this Craft Yarn Council chart, it also gives how many plies, how many threads of yarn is in one strand. No, not one strand. I will show you instead of just... So if you look at this is dropped Lima, which is a worsted weight yarn, or it straddles the line between DK and worsted. But if you see here, this is spun with... Okay, see if I can separate it. Yeah, this is a 4-ply yarn. So it has 1, 2, 3, 4 strands plied into one. And in the Craft Yarn Council chart, it says that the different yarn weights are like a 2-ply, like a sport weight is a 2-ply, a worsted weight is a 4-ply. I'm just making things up now because I haven't checked that. But this is not entirely true, because you can have, like the example that I'm going to give you of the bulky weight yarn, that only has 1 strand. So it's not like the thicker the yarn is, the more strands it's made up of. You can also have fingering weight yarns that have 4 strands or 4 plies. So this is not a hard and fast rule. So that's for that reason I'm not going to talk about that, because it really differs. Okay, and then I also had a second request from the same person, and they wondered what happens to the yarn weight when you hold 2 strands of yarn together. So I will give you, and I found a really good source for this, which tells you how to calculate this. And I will try to explain it to you, and hopefully it won't be difficult to understand. And here I will talk about holding 2 strands of the same yarn together, holding 2 strands of different weights together, but that still comes in balls or hanks or skeins of the same weight, like they're both 100 grams or 50 grams. And then the third example is when they come in different weights, like if you hold a 50-gram ball with a 25-gram ball, because then the calculations are a bit more complicated, but it's still rather easy. Okay, so now I'm going to dive into the different yarn weights. So the lightest yarn weight is lace. There is something called cobweb as well, but it's not commonly used, so I will not be talking about it. So lace weight is the lightest weight. It makes a really fine gauge fabric. It is often used with knitting with larger needles to make an airy open work or a lacy pattern. That makes it difficult to determine the gauge range, but it is approximately 33 to 40 stitches. It's often used for shawls or wraps that has a lacy pattern. And the needle sizes recommended is 1.5 to 2.25 millimeters. And I will put yardage and US needles somewhere on the screen. So I'm not going to be talking about it, but you can see it when you're watching the video. Yes. And the gauge is given over 10 centimeters or 4 inches and in stockinette stitch. And that is the same for all of the yarn weights that I will be talking about. The meterage for lace is somewhere between 600 and 800 meters per 100 grams skein. And that is also all of the, when I talk about the meterage, it is always on a 100 gram skein. Yes, and an example of this is the Malabrigo lace yarn. I don't have a full 50-gram hank of this, but I will show you what it looks like. This is I would say that this is a 1-ply. There's just one strand of yarn here. And this is very thin. I don't know if you can tell. This is 100% merino wool. And it has 430 meters on a 50-gram hank. Yes. The next category is fingering weight, and the most popular or common sock yarns is fingering weight. The 75-80% merino or wool, and the rest nylon. These are fingering weight yarns. It's slightly thicker than the laced weight, but it's still a thin yarn that can make a delicate fabric. And you can also knit lace with it. I mean, you can of course knit lace in any yarn weight, but this is good for lace knitting. This is a really versatile yarn weight. You can make garments, socks, accessories with this weight. Recommended needle size is 2.25 to 3.25 millimeters. The gauge is between 25 and 32 stitches. And a 100-gram skein usually has 360 to 500 meters of yarn. And the examples that I have brought is 2 different ones. The first one is the Knitting for Olive Merino. And this has 250 meters on a 50-gram skein. And this is 100% merino wool, non-superwash. And this looks like, you can see that this is rather thin as well. And this is on the thinner side of the fingering weight. I would call this a light fingering, actually. The second yarn that I have brought from this category is Sandnes Tynn Line, which is a plant fiber yarn. So the qualities of this yarn is very different from the merino. I mean, this has a lot of drape. It doesn't have any memory, so it's not going to pull back together. It does when you wash it, but with wear it's going to get bigger, whereas the merino is going to pull back. So this doesn't have the same elasticity. So this is another example where you can't just swap these two yarns with each other. And I have a whole episode on plant fiber yarns and the pain that they have caused me. So if you want to know more about that, I can link it. But yeah, this has cotton, it has linen, and it has it's not bamboo, it's the processed form of bamboo that I can't remember what it's called right now, but I will see if I can read this. Viscose, yes. And I will just pick out a strand so you can see what it looks like. And as you can see, this is also really thin. This has a 220 meters on a 50-gram ball. So that also makes lightweight garments and shawls or whatever you want to make with it. The next weight is sport weight, and this is a yarn that is great for color work or textured fabrics and even cables. This is a somewhat overlooked yarn weight that is coming back in popularity. Both there are more yarns to buy, there are more patterns being made. And this is often used in traditional colorwork mittens, at least in Sweden, I think Norway as well. Nordic countries, I'm guessing. But I know that in Swedish they are commonly used. They are often 2-ply wool yarns that you use for the mittens. I have an example of this, and this is Klippans tvåtrådiga that I talk about a lot. But these yarns are quite easy to come by, even if this is a local yarn. It is 100% wool yarn, and it is made up of 2 plies. I mean, I can't really, I will hold it like this, and you see when I separate it, it's 2 strands. Another one that is a plant fiber yarn that is also a sport weight is Mandarin Naturel by Sandnes. This has 130 meters on a 50-gram skein. And now I remember that I haven't told you the specifics about this yarn yet. But the needles commonly used are between 325 millimeter and 375 millimeter. The gauge is 23 to 26 stitches. And the meterage is 260 to 340 meters. Yes, the next one is the very popular DK weight yarn. It's used a lot by popular knitwear designers like Sari Nordlund or Petite Knit. It creates a lovely fabric that knits up faster than the thinner yarns that I've been talking about. DK is perfect for garments. It can also be used to make hats, shawls, mittens, all those kinds of things. The needles commonly used are between 3.75 millimeters and 4.5 millimeters, and the gauge is commonly between 21 and 24 stitches per 10 centimeters or 4 inches. And the meterage is 210 to 250 meters on a 100-gram skein. And the example that I have with me, I was trying to find yarns that you would be familiar with, but I have to say that I haven't been able to, because I had to pick from my stash, and I don't have my whole stash here. But as long as you get an example that you can understand, I mean, it's easy to find these yarns all over the world in different iterations. But this is Viking Garn, Merino Trend, and this is also a non-superwash wool yarn. It's 100% merino wool, and as you can see, this is a little bit thicker. And this is attached to a sweater, so that's why I'm stretching it a little bit. And this has 125 meters on a 50-gram skein. The next yarn weight is the worsted weight, and this is the kind of a workhorse yarn that can be used for almost anything, from garments to accessories to home decor. And it's a perfect yarn for beginners, because it's rather thick and it knits up quite quickly without being super heavy or annoying to work with. The needle size recommended is 4.5 to 5.5 millimeter. The gauge is 18 to 20 stitches, and the meterage is 180 to 200 meters. And I have two examples, one that is a little bit thinner and is straddling the line between DK and worsted, and that is the Drops Lima, which is a blend of alpaca and wool. And I showed this to you before, and like I also told you before, this is a 4-ply yarn, and this has 100 meters on a 50-gram ball. The other example is the Sandnes Per Gynt, which is a little bit thicker. This has 98 meters on this 50-gram skein. We could also find out how many plies this has. This looks like this. This is like an electric purple, which is probably the reason I haven't used it. This is also a 4-ply. Let me see if I can show you. Here you can see all of the 4 strands. Yes, and the next one is Aran weight. And I told you before that I chose to separate these two, but the Craft Yarn Council counts these as one category. And of course you are free to handle the yarns as you like. But the Aran weight is slightly thicker than the worsted weight, in my humble opinion. It is used for about the same things. It's really beautiful for cables and textured patterns, like the pretty Irish Aran sweaters, for example. And the yarn I have brought is Adlibris Socky Plus, and this has 156 meters on a 100-gram ball. And I will show you what this strand looks like. You can see that this is a bit thicker. And this is a surprise for me as well. It looks like this is a 3-ply. Yes. So just because the yarn is thicker doesn't mean it necessarily has more plies. Just that the individual plies are thicker. So yes. Okay. The last weight that I am going to talk about is bulky or chunky. And these are sometimes also separated, so that chunky is one weight and bulky is another. I think that chunky is considered thinner than bulky, but I can't swear. It could be the other way around. But yeah, I don't use this yarn weight pretty much at all. It's a bit too thick for my liking, and it uses needles that are a bit too thick for my liking. This is approximately twice as thick as a worsted weight yarn. It is sometimes referred to as chunky, like I said before. It works up quickly on large needles. It's great for heavier knits like cozy sweaters or blankets and rugs. The recommended needle size is 5.5 to 8 millimeters, and the gauge is 12 to 15 stitches. The meterage is 90 to 120 meters per 100 grams. And I mean, there is a jumbo category as well, but I'm not going to talk about it because I don't consider this to be yarn. It's more like rope. No, that's just me, but I'm going to stop here because these are the most commonly used yarn weights. And the next part of this video is talking a bit about how to calculate the weight of the yarn when you use 2 strands held together. So stay tuned for that. Instead of doing what I did before, where I write little words about what I'm going to talk about, I think I'm going to just kind of read from my notes, because I think this is too much to keep in my head, and also I'm going to get lost. So I apologize in advance if I look too much to my left where my laptop is sitting, but I will try to look at you as well. So if we start with a simple example, that could be holding two strands of fingering weight yarn together, like a common sock yarn, which is 400 meters on a 100 gram skein. So if you hold this double, they just stack on top of each other, and the length of the yarn doesn't change. It's still 400 meters, but now we're using the double amount in weight, which is 2 times 100, 200 grams. So we're using 200 grams of yarn instead of 100 when we hold them together. That's quite simple, right? To cover the same distance. The two yarns are then 400 meters per 200 grams. And if we divide both of these numbers, both above and below the bar, with 2, which you have to do to get a 100 gram skein, then the yarn weight of then you get the yarn weight of the doubled up yarn is 200 meters per 100 grams. If you look this up on the yarn weight chart, you get a worsted weight yarn, so 200 meters per 100 grams. And I mean, this works the same if you use 2 ends of the same ball. It's still going to be 200 meters per 100 grams. Yes, so the fingering weight yarn held double is the equivalent of 200 meters per 100 grams of worsted weight yarn. Yes, I feel like I made this quite simple exercise a bit more complicated than it would have to be. But a simple rule of thumb is, for the same yarn held double, you just divide the meterage or the yardage by 2. But if we want to use 2 different yarns held together, now it gets slightly more complicated, but it's still quite easy. So if we have the same example yarn, the sock yarn, that is 400 meters per 100 grams, and we hold that together with a lace weight yarn that is 800 meters per 100 grams. I mean, lace weight yarn don't often come in 100 gram balls, but this is just for the example. First, we have to figure out how many skeins of the thicker or lower meterage yarn it takes to cover the same distance as the thinner yarn. And in this case, the answer is 800 divided by 400, because there was 800 meters on the lace weight yarn and 400 meters on the fingering weight skein. And that is 2 skeins, because 800 divided by 400 is 2. So that means you need, for every 1 skein of lace weight yarn, you need 2 skeins of fingering weight yarn. Yes. And then you calculate the combined weight of the skeins. 1 skein of lace weight plus 2 skeins of fingering that are 100 gram each. So 1 plus 2 times 100, that is 3. So if you use 200 gram skeins of the fingering weight yarn and 100 grams of the lace weight yarn, then you have 300 grams. That was quite easy. So the fingering held together with the lace weight is then 800 meters divided by 300 grams. So you divide both the numbers above and below the division bar by 3, and you get approximately 270 meters per 100 gram, and that is a DK weight. So if you hold sock yarn together with a lace mohair, which is the most common thing to do, you get a DK weight yarn. But if you have a different, if the skeins have a different weight from each other, you will get what I mean when I get into the example. Because this example was still pretty straightforward, where the numbers are evenly divisible. But here's an example of different yarn weights that come in skeins of different weights. That's what I meant. And I picked a very popular combination, the knitting for olive merino combined with the knitting for olive soft silk mohair. And the knitting for olive merino, which is 100% merino wool, has 250 meters per 50 grams. The knitting for olive silk mohair, which is a 70% mohair and 30% silk blend, has 225 meters on a 25 gram skeins. So here you're working with one yarn that comes in 50 gram skeins and one yarn that comes in 25 gram skeins. And here is where it gets a little bit more tricky. So, and since this is not the same, you first need to convert the numbers to figure out which of these is the thinner one. And if you're imagining that all of the yarns come in 100 gram skeins, that makes the comparison easier. So then you need 2 skeins of merino, because they are 50 grams. So that is 500 meters per 100 grams. And to get to 100 grams of the silk mohair, you need 4 balls because they're 25 grams. So that is 225 meters times 4, which is 900 meters per 100 grams. And now you have to figure out how many 100 gram skeins of the merino it takes to cover the same distance as the soft silk mohair. And that is 900, because that is how the meterage of the mohair on a 100 gram skein, and divided by 500, which is the meterage of the merino on a 100 gram skein. I hope that this is not getting confusing to you. And if you divide 900 by 500, it's 1.8 skeins. So it takes 1.8 skeins of merino to cover the same distance as the mohair. And the combined weight of the skein is then 1, the mohair, plus 1.8, the merino, times 100 grams, that is 280 grams of yarn. So the combined yarn weight is 900 meters divided by 280 grams, which then divided by 2.8 equals approximately 320 meters per 100 grams, and that is a sport weight. So you divide 900 by 2.8 and 280 by 2.8, and then you get 320 by 100. So, whew. Thank you so much for watching. I am, my head is spinning now. I hope that this cleared things up for you. And I really hope that I didn't make you more confused than you already were. Maybe you weren't confused at all. I feel like I made myself confused. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great last days of the year and happy knitting. Bye bye.